Hi, I'm Caitlin Gracier. I'm going to provide to you a brief history on special education in the United States and also some resources at the end of the video. If you have a child with special needs or know someone who has a child with special needs, feel free to share these resources with them. It can feel overwhelming sometimes, but thankfully now here we are in 2020 and there are many more resources available to families today than previous generations did not have. People often see education as a constitutional right. However, education isn't mentioned in any part of the Constitution. Education is a state responsibility. The first state to pass a law related to education was Massachusetts in 1852. By 1918, all of the other states had passed laws as well. There was a White House conference on children with disabilities held in 1910, whose general idea was to move children with disabilities away from institutions and into schools, segregating them with other children who did not have disabilities. Several laws regarding special education rights went into effect across the nation over the following 20 years. The end result was classrooms with just as much negative and ineffective and really inappropriate tools for disabled people as the institutions had been. So they just went from one negative place to another. In the court case of Beatty versus the Board of Education in 1919, the court ruled that a person with disabilities could be excluded from receiving an education at the school's official discretion, even if that student had been in public school through 5th grade. There were several other court cases of the similar nature up until 1969, all of which resulted in poor favor of those students with disabilities and their needs. The reasons cited were that those students had speech delays or they drooled and the teachers didn't have time to service them, and it was a distraction for the other students. Parents across the nation continued to advocate for their children's rights and needs. Many organizations were formed, and many of them are still active today. A couple of them include the Council for Exceptional Children and the National Society for Autistic Children. After Brown versus the Board of Education during the Civil Rights Movement, parents across the country persisted for the rights of their children with disabilities. In the Mills versus the Board of Education case in 1972, the parents of 7 children with varying disabilities filed a case against the District of Columbia's Board of Education. Their 7 children represented over 18,000 other children in the district. Ultimately, they won their case. Similar to how Brown versus the Board of Education had ruled that segregation of students based on race was unconstitutional, so was segregating them based off of their disability. After Mills versus the Board of Education, dozens of other court cases were filed, 46 to be exact, over 18 different states. Over and over again, school officials claimed that teachers were not adequately trained and facilities were not designed to accommodate these disabled individuals. In 1973, Congress passed the 504 Act, which stated that no one could be denied any activity receiving federal funding based on their handicap. Public school is federally funded. What many people do not know is that because public school is federally funded, private schools are under no obligation to provide special services like public schools are. In 1974, Congress discovered that more than 1.75 million children were not receiving an education solely due to their disabilities. Thankfully, President Gerald Ford signed the Education for All Handicapped Children Act in 1975, which provided guidelines for providing a free, appropriate education for these individuals. If the states did not comply, then they would begin to be cut off from their flow of federal funding. By 1985, all of the states were on board. Today, we know this act as the Individuals with Disabilities Act. It was renamed in 1990, and some of the wording was changed. For example, they changed handicap to disability, and 2 new categories were added: autism and traumatic brain injury. The new revised law also added rehab services and assistive technology, such as text-to-speech devices that help disabled people communicate when they're not able to. 5 resources for families with students or children with special needs. First is the Washington State OSPI office, the Office of Superintendent of Public Instruction. And here you can read about how data is collected in Washington State and laws and procedures that are specific to Washington State. 2, the Special Education Support Center, and those folks collaborate with state and local resources to bring together support for special education families, such as online webinars and workshops. 3, Washington Pave. Pave is a group of parents of disabled children in Washington State who've come together and formed an organization to support each other and share resources. 4, Easter Seals. Easter Seals provides opportunities and resources for disabled people to work, live, play, and thrive for their whole lives, not just when they're minors. And the 5th resource I want to share is the YMCA, which provides all sorts of free classes for people with disabilities. Depending on which YMCA you go to, the services might be different. Thank you for watching.